The values system of a company guides the actions of the engineers who work at that company. Some companies value open communication and a flat organization where anybody can talk to anyone else. Other companies encourage hierarchy and secrecy so that employees are only focused on their specific section of the company. Some companies take themselves seriously, and they have a work environment that is as stoic as the military. Other companies pride themselves on having good beer and a friendly, laid-back atmosphere. When company values are properly defined, the values can be used as reference points when making decisions. At Amazon, one of the core company values is bias for action. As an engineer, you're often in a situation where you can wait for more information, or you can start a project immediately with an incomplete picture of how you're going to finish it. The bias for action lets you know that at Amazon you should usually start the project despite having an incomplete picture. Another use of a company's values system is for hiring. When a company publishes their values, prospective employees can use those stated values as a way to know if they would be a good cultural fit. For example, move fast and break things was a value that allowed Facebook to ship new products faster than any other company before it. But the speed of movement is not for every engineer. Some engineers like to have their code unit tested and free of all bugs before shipping to production. Every company has values that define that company, and every engineer has values that define how that engineer wants to work. Lynne Tye started her company Key Values as a platform to index companies by their value systems. This allows engineers to find companies that are in good cultural fit for their value system. Lynne joins the show today to explain how engineers and companies define their own value systems and how that affects the outcomes of engineering organizations. Lynne also talks about her time at Homejoy, which was one of the first companies in the gig economy. Homejoy was an on-demand house cleaning service that grew extremely fast, but ultimately it went under due to lawsuits. The challenges of Homejoy were a predictor of the challenges that were later faced by Uber and Airbnb. And it was fascinating to hear Lynne reflect on her time spent managing operations at Homejoy, which was about as operationally intensive a company as you can possibly imagine. Thanks to Cortland Allen for the intro to Lynne, and if you haven't checked out Cortland's podcast, the Indie Hackers podcast, you should subscribe to it. Indie Hackers breaks down the engineering and the business models behind small software companies. It's one of my favorite shows, and I really encourage you to check it out because there's probably significant overlap between the audiences that Indie Hackers would appeal to and Software Engineering Daily. So thanks for listening, and let's get on with the show. Women 2.0 is a company with a vision of gender equality in the tech world. Women 2.0 is a community, a media company, and a jobs platform that connects top female talent with engineering jobs around the world. At the new Women 2.0 jobs platform, find vetted jobs for women engineers, data scientists, and product managers. To find a job that is right for you, go to women2.com/sedaily. And if you're an engineering company, you can connect with top female talent on Women 2.0. Companies like Twitter, MongoDB, and Craigslist use Women 2.0 to find new hires. Go to women2.com/sedaily to find out how to post your company's jobs to Women 2.0. Thanks to Women 2.0 for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily, and check it out at women2.com/sedaily. Thanks for listening, and let's get back to the show. Lynne Tye is the founder of Key Values. Lynne, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. We're talking today about company values and how that pertains to an engineering team. You have built a platform called Key Values. We'll get into what the platform does. But first of all, how do you define values as they pertain to engineering teams?
Ooh, that's a good question. So unlike company values, core values, which are a little bit different, The way that I've defined values for my website is these are things that engineers like you or me care about and prioritize when we're evaluating different job opportunities. So if you want to join a team that, really is light on meetings because you really don't like having meetings, that is an important value to you, as an example.
So there's an important distinction between the value system of a company and the value system that is implemented by the engineering teams within that company?
Yeah, and in many cases, I think core company values they're really helpful for keeping the company, unified and cohesive, but sometimes it's really unclear how that actually translates to the day-to-day, operations or practices or behaviors on the engineering team. And any engineer can probably say this if they've worked at a larger company. Sometimes those core company values really manifest themselves differently for, the sales team versus the engineering team. So key values really gets at the values for the engineering team specifically. Yeah, it just helps them kind of look for teams based on those values.
So the values of the individual teams, those do tend to be downstream values from the company values. From my point of view, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would say, actually, I wouldn't say that's always yes. And it really depends on the size of the company. And really, in some ways, there's subcultures within an engineering department. So, an infrastructure team, behaves in a different way. The day-to-day looks different than, a team that works more closely with designers and has a lot of product managers and or the marketing team, for instance. So I think it really does vary. And ultimately, it's nothing about whether or not core company values are true or good or anything like that. It's really just going almost like bottom up in terms of what do you want in your day-to-day work life.
I see. Do engineers know what their own values are? Because if we've got these different engineering teams across the landscape of different companies, ideally, if I'm an engineer, I should know what my values are so that I can match to the engineer, some engineering team that would fit with that value set that I have. So do most engineers know their own set of values?
I'm laughing a little because I want to say that it's mixed. I would say since working on key values, I didn't really realize how many people don't know what's important to them. And to be fair, I think it takes a lot of experience, figuring out what matters to you. Just like anything else in life, you don't really know if you like or dislike something until you've had a lot of experiences. So I would say that in some ways, my goal with key values is to help engineers identify what those values are and paint a better picture of what they're looking for. Because no, I don't think everyone, is able to articulate what they're looking for. So no, it's a tricky question. I think that it takes a lot of introspection and evaluation and reevaluation, because let's be honest, I think values change and they evolve. So even for me, my values have definitely shifted and matured over the last few years. So it's something that takes a lot of continuous reflection. And I don't think many people are diligent about doing that type of reevaluation.
If I'm an engineer, how should I go about defining those values? Was there an exercise I can go through to figure out who I am as a value set holding engineer?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways. So kind of how I actually started doing this long before I started doing key values. Actually, a good friend of mine, I was, really confused about what I wanted to do with my career. I had actually just dropped out of grad school and was like super lost. And a friend of mine said I should just sit down and make a list of my top 10 personal values. Just like what are the most important things to me in life and things I wouldn't trade anything else for, and kind of rank them. And that exercise, I was like, yeah, I'll do that in an hour and then let's talk. And it took me like several days to really think about what matters to me most. And, I think sometimes it's easy to look at a long list and be like, yep, these are great. I love this, humor, health, family. These are all great to check them all. But it's another thing to really, say which ones you would choose over another and then rank them. When you're given a limited list, it really, forces you to prioritize. And I think that's a really good start. And then, of course, how that translates to work, some of those values, hopefully, I mean, this is different for each person, but sometimes those values should translate to how you behave at work. Maybe you want to work with people who share your personal values. If, actually those examples I gave, family and like health are really important to you, then it's probably a good idea to align those with your work culture and your coworkers. But I think that's one way. And of course, the harder, slower way is just if you work with lots of different teams, you will very quickly figure out what you prefer. And I don't think there's right or wrong answers at all. It's really just comes down to preference and also what's appropriate for that time of your life. Those things change.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that gets to the reevaluation thing. I certainly am not the same engineer today as I was 5 years ago or even 2 years ago. I have different values. Those values have morphed. Your company key values indexes the different value systems of different companies. What are some of the values that you have looked at that a company may or may not exhibit? Or I guess I should say the engineering team at that company.
So wait, sorry, can you explain what you mean by that? So you're saying
So you've got this list of values like customer comes first or uses agile or eats lunch together. Basically, I can click on these different values on your website and I can find the engineering teams that are going to align with that value. So what are some of these values and these categories that you managed to break the different engineering teams into?
Oh, I mean, so each engineering team on key values, there's a list of, 44 values, and engineering teams are limited to 8 of those values. And they have to also, like what I mentioned before, rank these. So if you choose on any given value, there are many teams that have not selected that value, and therefore they won't be filtered through. So really what I mentioned earlier in terms of that personal exercise I did a few years ago is what I'm asking each engineering team to do themselves. I give them a list of preset values, and they have to, they work together to identify the ones that best describe their engineering culture and their practices and their operations. And then they qualify each of those in their profile. So when you go to key values and you click on one of those, you're really seeing which teams also chose that in their top 8.
I think that values are related to culture. There's some relationship there. Maybe the culture is an abstraction of all the different values blended together. And when I've talked to people about company culture, some people say culture is what we are. We are X. We get omelets for breakfast as a team every day. These are the things that we do. Other people say that their culture is that we are not X. We do not ever put cheese on our omelets as an engineering team. I just had eggs for breakfast. If you can't tell. What are the most divisive values? Like, what are the things that I can look at and some companies are going to say, we are not this. And other people will proudly say, we are this.
That's a really good question. I think, so before I even answer that with actual examples, there are a lot of companies when I talk to them that say certain things, but they still aren't quite comfortable sharing that publicly. And I think that's kind of like my goal also with key values is making sure people feel proud standing by who they are, even if it's not, what they think is, and I'm doing air quotes here, what they think is like the right thing to say. But ones that people feel comfortable about usually have to do with like their strategy. A great example is fast-paced environment. Some teams are like, this is exactly who we are. This describes everything about each of the individuals that make up our, our team. And then other companies, are like, we have nothing to do with that fast-paced environment culture. Like we're very thoughtful, we're cautious. I think fast-paced environment kind of touches broadly and can relate to other departments in a company. But when it comes to coding, there's another value, risk-taking over stability. And I think this kind of also touches on, when it comes to pushing code, are you going to prioritize being fast or are you going to prioritize being perfect? And I don't care what anyone says, you really cannot be both. Of course, there's times where you can prioritize one over the other, in which case the whole goal is for someone to explain those situations. But really, you can't be both of those things. And there are some teams who really lean towards velocity and they're all about breaking things. one of the teams that I profiled, Amplitude, they are, they would definitely lean towards releasing and reverting versus spending a lot of time perfecting code. And of course, there are other companies who, spend a lot of time making sure that things have been thoroughly tested. There's multiple reviewers before they even, merge that code. So I think those are really good examples and are very divisive. Of course, there's the other one has good beer. That's probably been the most controversial value on the list. I think just given the current climate in Silicon Valley, alcohol at the workplace is just very controversial. But I've been getting more teams that aren't based in the Bay. Like companies in Germany are like, yeah, has good beer. That's a huge part of who we are and how we socialize. And it's just a different, it's a different scenario, I suppose. And things are a little sensitive in the Bay. So, but yeah, that's another very divisive value.
You are programming a new service for your users, or you are hacking on a side project. Whatever you're building, you need to send email. And for sending email, developers use SendGrid. SendGrid is the API for email, trusted by developers. Send transactional emails through the SendGrid API. Build marketing campaigns with a beautiful interface for crafting the perfect email. SendGrid is trusted by Uber, Airbnb, and Spotify, but anyone can start for free and send 40,000 emails in their first month. After the first month, you can send 100 emails per day for free. Just go to sendgrid.com/sedaily to get started. Your email is important. Make sure it gets delivered properly with SendGrid, a leading email platform. Get started with 40,000 emails your first month at sendgrid.com/sedaily. That's sendgrid.com/sedaily. When I click on creative and innovative, then I get a list of companies that have identified with that specific value. They've said, we are creative and innovative. We want to be categorized with having that value. So this is on your website. So I can click into one of the companies. I can click into Pocket Gems, which is listed as one of the creative and innovative companies, and it tells me like more about how they are, how they work, who they are, what goes on at Pocket Gems. So if I'm looking for a job, I'm looking for a company to work at, I can use this as a platform to learn more about companies. Once I have that information, what should I do with it? I mean, am I just looking at this information in order to find out this, does this company fit with my gestalt?
Oh man, if you find a team that you love and it speaks to you and you feel excited about, apply. I think a lot of people come to Key Values, whether they're actively or passively looking for a new job. I think it's really educational just to see what's out there. And that's a whole another thing I can talk about. I really feel like people lack exposure to other teams. Yeah, actually, I kind of want to dive into this because I've been thinking about this a lot.
Sure.
Is that so I compare looking for a job to dating, and I always say there's all these parallels, but one way that they're extremely different is that when you're in a relationship, you're constantly exposed to other examples of relationships and, partners. Even if you're single or in a relationship, you meet other singles or couples and you hear about other couples and you see how other couples interact with one another. You might go to a barbecue and this couple you just meet, they're talking about how every year they both take a week off from work and then they spend, there's just like an example of things they do. And you're like, hey, I like that. We should do that too, to whoever your significant other is. But when you're working on a team at a company, it's rare that you are exposed to seeing how other teams work and interact with each other. Like, it's just really, for me, I don't think I ever did when I was working full-time at a company. I mean, maybe there's conferences so you meet other people, or even if you go to happy hours, like you can kind of see how they interact with each other in that type of setting. But it's really rare to just see how other groups of people, collaborate or how they communicate or how they, make really important decisions where there are major trade-offs. I think there's just not a lot of exposure there. So anyways, that's my long thing about how I think people should read profiles anyway, just because they're really educational. I've learned so much doing this. But to answer your question about, if you click a value and then find a team that matches and read it, I mean, it really is kind of a self-filtering tool. Sometimes teams define something and it just doesn't speak to you, and that's okay. My hope is that it saves you the time of, applying, doing the technical phone screen, doing the take-home challenge, doing whiteboarding challenges, and then, visiting the company for an on-site interview. You usually have to do all those things first before you actually get to meet the team and have them describe, tell me how you're creative and innovative. So really, it's just saving people time to learn a little bit more about the team before they go through all the trouble. And of course, if you read, Pocket Gems is a great example. I didn't know what they meant by creative and innovative until I worked with them. And their team is extremely creative. And it means visual artists. They have a lot of designers. They're all about storytelling. Pocket Gems makes mobile games. So they have, a lot of their team members used to work on movie production, or they've written, they've been writers for TV shows that many of us have watched. It's that type of creativity. And if that is exciting to someone, they should absolutely, by all means, learn more and apply.
Yeah. And you make some really good points. I've worked at probably 5 or 6 different companies throughout internships and jobs that I left quickly, jobs that I stayed at for a longer period of time. And each of the cultures was radically divergent. There was, I'm thinking back now, and there was not any two companies that were extremely similar. And this may be surprising to people who have not worked at many companies or people who have not worked at any companies. There's just radically different cultures within the company. I think there's a lot of, within the company, whatever culture the company has, it does bleed down into the engineering teams. So the way that you get the information about these companies, the different categories that they fall into, the different, they each choose 10 values that make up their key values. I think it's 10. 8. Okay.
I misspoke earlier too. It's okay.
Oh, okay. All right. So 8 values. Are you interviewing each of these companies to find out what their values are?
Yeah. In the very beginning, usually I have the team spend some time choosing their 8 values. But then when I interview, I would really ask deep dive questions, things that if I was a candidate, applying for a job on your team, I would really, want to know more about. So if a company says that they have work-life balance, I would ask, I have probably 5 or 10 questions lined up just asking what they mean by that. So I would do these interviews, record them, and then, of course, work with them to put it into writing. There were times where if a company struggled to really talk about a given value, I would suggest that maybe they think of another value, because if you choose a value and you can't talk about it at length, it's probably not accurate. It's probably something that sounds nice, but isn't something that actually describes who you are and, how your team operates together. So yeah, every team chooses their own values and they have complete control over the content in their profiles. And I'm just really there as a coach or a cheerleader in some cases to help them put it into words.
Do you have a standardized set of questions, or do you have ways where you provoke them into talking about the things that they may not know how to express?
Yeah, so I've gotten a lot better at this. In the beginning, I was kind of learning the process too. So since I've launched, I actually don't do in-person or video interviews anymore. I do have a list of prompts and things that help people, get unstuck if they get stuck writing. And these really help teams figure out what type of content they should be curating for each of their value selections. But yeah, definitely some teams need a lot more help than others, and it's been really interesting to just see how it varies.
When you talk, I don't think these companies are indexed on key values, but when you talk to the engineering teams or people who work at engineering teams at places like Google or Facebook or Apple, how do they look at values, the values of their engineering team? Or have you talked to people like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to know tons of engineers
Right,
at
okay.
these companies living in San Francisco. I live with several Google employees, or I have lived with several Google employees. It's interesting. I mean, I think why I started this is because it's good to know what the company culture is like at large, but it's really just it's rare for a company that's large like Google for the culture to be super consistent across every team. And again, it just depends on like what product it is or how many people are on that team, or like if you're working with 4 people, let's just say a small team, and there are teams that are that size at bigger companies, like maybe the 4 of you agree that you can start your day at 11 a.m. And that happens. So I think it's like small things like that that really aren't captured with big company goals or company values. But generally, I'd say that people think values do hold some truth to like the company values to their own individual teams. But there's a lot more information that a job seeker would want to know before applying or accepting an offer to that team. And so what I'm really trying to get at is exposing that lower level granular like information early on. Because it's great to know that a company, like we all, we prioritize integrity. I think that's great. I definitely I'm not a naysayer, but if you're working day to day, you want to know how that actually affects your, like what time you show up, who you work with. Are you sitting with people that are also engineers, or are you sitting alongside sales people? It's just little things like that that don't really get touched on. Actually, earlier you mentioned eats lunch together. Like that's usually not a company core value. Like we eat lunch together, but that's something that's important, and it happens every single day. And people want to know what that time is like. Am I going to eat lunch at my desk alone, or am I going to eat with everybody? Or maybe lots of companies do this, which I've learned, is they combine lunchtime with talks or lunch and learns or demos or something that's both in line with their company's goals, but also it's social and collaborative. So I think those things are important to touch on.
Right. So one thing I'm a little bit confused about. So key values is not about the company values itself. It's about the values of the engineering teams, but
Correct.
But there are different engineering teams within a given company. Is this just for companies that are small enough where the culture of the engineering team is pretty unified?
No, that's a great question. So originally, yes, I wanted to just focus on small engineering teams. And some companies so for example, Udacity and Postmates, these have, many engineering teams, but the profile is for a specific one. So I'm really trying to look at the team level and capture some of the differences that I mentioned before. Like I said, there's variance between the subcultures of engineering teams at a bigger org. So that's definitely something that I'm trying to get at. And also there are teams that have, multiple pods or, teams or groups or however they organize themselves. But because people transfer from teams so often, it is actually very consistent. And so they choose to create a profile that talks about their entire engineering department.
So going back to those big companies, I don't know if you've read about this much or talked to many people about this, that like when I was at Amazon, the company values were so ingrained in the culture that they seemed to come up in every meeting, and they seemed to be a framework for how people made decisions. They were so impactful that they definitely affected the decision-making structure of the individual engineering teams that were under the umbrella of Amazon. And it really made me think about how those huge companies, they want the culture that they establish to permeate the broader organization. So like, at Facebook, they do this with the propaganda posters on the wall. I'm sorry, not propaganda posters, but things like, move fast and break things. You'll see these throughout the place. And they get the culture to really scale and to adopt the different values within that organization. Have you seen that be important to the companies that you talk to, like ways that they do get the values to permeate the different areas of the organization?
Oh, man, absolutely. It's actually funny. I was just talking to someone from the AWS team, and they mentioned like it just casually in the first email some of the company's core values. So it's funny that you just said that. I think that's a great example. That's what companies should aspire to do. You shouldn't create values that you just, this is like what everyone says, don't create values that you just put on the wall and look nice. It's really like, how do you make sure this is integrated with the day-to-day and how people make decisions and how people organize, and really how do people hire and retain their employees? So I think that's exactly the goal. And the way that you do this is really by, first choosing values that are easy to, or like it's natural for people at the company to, to exhibit. And it really starts with leadership. So my guess, just thinking about this and working with companies of different sizes, is it's starting early and, establishing a set of core values that everyone at the company, can look to. It's like their North Star. And then just, again, evaluating constantly within your company. I'm sure Amazon has, evolved their values since their inception. And then also it really is one of the purposes for having these values is it gives people guidance in terms of who they should hire. And it's kind of like what I'm getting at with key values is if you should really hire people that are culturally aligned. And I'm guessing most engineers want to join companies that they feel culturally aligned with. So ultimately, the way that it permeates across the company is just for the leaders to lead by example. I mean, you can look at all of the horror stories of companies who say one thing and do the complete opposite. I think this has to do with senior leadership not walking the walk. They say one thing and do the opposite. I mean, when you go to a company and they give you like, here's our handbook or onboarding papers, you can read what the company says they are, but really you're going to just follow suit based on how the people around you are behaving. So if everyone's doing something or the person next to you is getting promoted or rewarded for some type of behavior, then that's what you think the culture is. It doesn't matter what it says in, on the wall or in the handbook. If you really, culture is what people do and how they behave. So yeah, I think it's just walking the walk instead of just talking the talk.
For years, when I started building a new app, I would use MongoDB. Now I use MongoDB Atlas. MongoDB Atlas is the easiest way to use MongoDB in the cloud. It's never been easier to hit the ground running. MongoDB Atlas is the only database as a service from the engineers who built MongoDB. The dashboard is simple and intuitive, but it provides all the functionality that you need. The customer service is staffed by people who can respond to your technical questions about Mongo. With continuous backup, VPC peering, monitoring, and security features, MongoDB Atlas gives you everything you need from MongoDB in an easy-to-use service. And you can forget about needing to patch your Mongo instances and keep it up to date, because Atlas automatically updates its version. Check out mongodb.com/sedaily to get started with MongoDB Atlas and get $10 credit for free. And even if you're already running MongoDB in the cloud, Atlas makes migrating your deployment from another cloud service provider trivial with its live import feature. Get started with a free 3-node replica set. No credit card is required. As an exclusive offer for Software Engineering Daily listeners, use code SEDAILY for $10 credit when you're ready to scale up. Go to mongodb.com/sedaily to check it out. And thanks to MongoDB for being a repeat sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. It means a whole lot to us. Yeah, this was like, reminds me of how Enron's values were communication and respect and integrity. Mm-hmm. And at Enron, you had a management team that was hiding everything from the lower level employees, so the communication was terrible. Respect I think that there was, animosity between the different teams at Enron. They were competing with each other. And of course, integrity, well, there was certainly no integrity at Enron. Anybody who has not heard the Enron story should check out the documentary or read about it. But people were parroting people were parroting each other. People were mirroring each other, and it didn't matter what the value system at the top was.
Yeah, that's just a classic example of how leadership didn't behave in line with their values, with their stated values. And I'm sure there was, even lower level people seeing, like when you see someone get rewarded or promoted or celebrated or they get a shout out at a company all hands for doing something that is really not in line with those values, you throw those out the door. That is what the culture is. Mm-hmm. So actions speak louder than words is really what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Enron's a really good example of how that did not. Yeah, you hear the horror stories more than the other way. It's funny. I feel like just talking about key values with people, a lot of people are scarred or like they just remember the horror stories. And it's funny because I'm working with engineering teams and the stereotypes are, engineers are introverted, they're great at coding, terrible at selling or talking about themselves. And it's kind of true. I see like almost quite the opposite. I meet these teams who it takes me days working with them to really uncover their best qualities. And I fall in love with them days after. But at first I'm like, oh yeah, it seems kind of like dry or like they don't, this is horrible for me to admit, but there are lots of teams where I'm like not that excited about learning about and working with. But then I realized like they are so fascinating and they have all these practices in place that are, really unique and they have such an opinion and strong personality. They just aren't good at broadcasting them. So in some ways I feel like it's like the opposite. Like these people have really strong values. They just aren't good at talking about them. So it's like, yeah, it's been really interesting for sure.
So Key Values was, I think, the first major project that you started building / the first company that you started building. You started to code a few years ago. You started freelancing in order to improve yourself at coding, and then you started Key Values. What's been the process for building it, and what has been challenging? What has been surprising? Tell me about that story.
Oh man. Well, learning to code was its own journey. It's not easy. It's really frustrating and hard, but I'm so glad that I decided to make that career change. My parents were a little nervous, I'll tell you that. And then freelancing taught me a lot. I've heard this from people that say freelancing is like the gateway to entrepreneurship because you kind of get a taste of that freedom and being able to, set your own schedule. And then it's, one thing leads to the next. I started Key Values actually just kind of like I was freelancing and I was looking for, potentially a full-time employee job. And it was just so frustrating. It was just not fun at all. Trying to learn about teams. I can't even tell you how many career pages and job descriptions I read. My eyes glazed over. They all look exactly the same. I couldn't even tell what team I was like reading about at some point. And then, yeah, when I started working on Key Values, it was really just to solve a problem that I had. And, my boyfriend's a startup founder and I constantly hear him talk about how hard it is to hire engineers. So solving a problem for him as well. Yeah, I think I had a lot of imposter syndrome trying to build something myself. And I still kind of see it as a learning opportunity in terms of the engineering aspect. And the most surprising thing, I wouldn't say it has to do so much with the tech. Actually, sadly, I haven't really been coding that much. Working on Key Values has really been about the content. So I sadly don't, make many commits these days.
I can relate.
Yeah. Yeah, I miss it a little bit. But I just think it was really just getting over each hurdle and thinking that it was going to take me forever. And like, I just, so here's the real story is that I learned to code I was like 26 years old. I didn't know anything about coding. I didn't even know if I had to like download a terminal onto my computer. I knew nothing. And I think sometimes it's feeling like you're really behind and like you'll never get there. Like I just felt like everyone had a huge head start from me. And I think the hardest part is just like pushing through that. But also the thing that I've learned the most is that if you just work a little bit every day, you'll get there without even you just have to just make them chunkable sizes and then you'll get there. I don't even know if I just answered your question.
No, you did. You did. And I can definitely relate to the content side of things because this is very. I mean, I think Software Engineering Daily is probably even less of a software company and even more of a content business than Key Values. What's your perspective on that? Like, because I know you're good friends with Cortland Allen. He helped you kind of.
He helped me a lot,
yeah. And I mean, he has basically kind of a content business, or it's like Indie Hackers started as like maybe a content leaning software platform. Now it seems to be leaning a little more towards the software and the community side of things, which you could see Key Values going in that direction as well. Potentially. What's your thought on the content business of the business around software engineering content? Because it seems like there's more and more people that are coming into software engineering. There's more and more people that are wanting to read content about it. You think there's room for more businesses around content?
Absolutely. I mean, there's more and more people learning. Everyone has a different learning style. I don't ever think there's just one, there'll never just be one way that people want to digest information. Like, a lot of people prefer reading over listening. Podcasts obviously are super popular because some people don't feel like reading and they want to be able to multitask. So I really think, and even within podcasts, I think people, really love a host and the way that they appreciate their opinions and the way they conduct interviews. So I don't think there's ever going to be too much. I'm thinking about if that's what I really feel, but I definitely feel like there's room for people to continue creating content. There's all sorts of audiences and segments of those audiences that want something different. So yeah, it's definitely challenging to make sure, if you're a software engineer and you're creating one of these sites, it's really up to the person to see how they balance, their focus between, still coding and creating the content. Cortland's a really good example in terms of he loves coding. He misses it in a way that people would get homesick. So I think he just finds ways to give himself challenges sometimes, just so he can, flex that coding muscle of his.
Well, the other side of things is he obviously went through YC, and at YC, and this is just an immutable fact of engineering companies, the economics you get from having a software company that works are so much better than the economics of having a content business that works, because the content business, people are purchasing your content, which you have to put a lot of work into every new piece of content. In the software business, you write the software once and you sell it to people and you get money for the same piece of software that is free to copy every single time.
It's funny because this kind of circles back to values. It really just depends on what your goals are and what you want.
True.
Ultimately, for me, I'm not against making money, but obviously I would, definitely take a pay cut to do something that I'm really excited about. I'm constantly learning. I love meeting new people and learning about their experiences. So for me, those things are, invaluable. And yeah, so I think, of course, there's all these trade-offs. I think it really just depends on the business and the people behind it. If you want to make money and that's your primary goal, I'm not sure that making a content site is the fastest route there. Obviously, I'm not hating on either of us. I think, there's reasons why we're doing what we're doing. But yeah, I think it's just, you have to figure out what works for you and what your values are.
Totally. Yeah, and I can completely, it resonates with me.
Yeah.
You worked at Homejoy before you got into coding. And Homejoy was a really interesting story. It was one of the first gig economy companies, and it was really taking off and getting a lot of momentum. I remember seeing some charts around its growth. Homejoy was a on-demand cleaning company, so I could order a cleaner to come to my house and clean my apartment. What was it like being at Homejoy as that rocket ship was taking off?
Oh man, it's hard to compare it to anything else I've ever done. Remember now, so Homejoy was my first real job ever. So it was pretty funny just because I thought that was what working was. I had just dropped out of grad school and I joined Homejoy maybe 6 months later. But for my first job ever, it was quite the experience. It was really exciting. I'm like smiling right now just thinking about it. It was just like a really special time. Everyone there was so passionate. The energy was just like unparalleled. I don't think I've ever worked somewhere quite like that, with so many people all on the same page, like working towards this mission. Yeah, it was just really exciting. And it definitely, like, I'm still kind of like, I mean, obviously, so if people don't know, Homejoy folded. So it was, while it was like skyrocketed up, it also kind of had it ended up folding. But the experience of it, especially early on, was just, there was like definitely some magic there, I would say. I know it sounds so corny, man.
No, well, I mean, you were telling me about it when we chatted last, about some of the grind, because there was so much volume on both sides of the marketplace, both supply and demand. There were a whole lot of people who wanted to be cleaners, a whole lot of people who wanted their houses cleaned, and you were managing operations of those two sides of the marketplace. So it sounded intense. Can you maybe relay a couple anecdotes about the intensity?
Yeah, I mean, first thing is actually just talking about core values. I was actually just curious what Homejoys were, and I was looking them up the other day. One of them was something like, no one's above any job. And that was actually one of my favorite. Like, I didn't help come up with these. I really resonated with that one. So one of the stories was, we had VIP clients at one point, and we were, closed for the holidays. It was like a Thanksgiving day, and so there was some glitch, I'm not sure, but one of our VIP clients actually booked a cleaning on Thanksgiving Day. And we were scrappy. Like, Homejoy was a scrappy team. And instead of canceling or telling the client that we were actually closed that day, Adora, the CEO, and I actually went and cleaned that apartment ourselves. I will always remember cleaning a house or cleaning an apartment on Thanksgiving Day with Adora on our hands and knees. It was intense and scrappy, and everyone was definitely, we lived and breathed it for sure.
Did you interact much with the cleaners at Homejoy? Like, what was the...
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I was the operations manager for the Bay Area, and I was also kind of, played the role of the city manager. So I onboarded up until maybe for the first year and a few months, I onboarded almost every cleaner that came onto the platform from the Bay Area. And then I had Pete was my right-hand man, and he ended up taking over the onboarding process. But I interacted with cleaners very closely. In the very beginning, this is how scrappy we were. This is when there was less than 20 employees. A lot of the cleaners actually had my personal cell phone number and would contact me that way.
Wow.
So I got to know that the cleaning staff really, firsthand. I actually keep in touch with some of them still to this day.
Incredible.
So I formed some serious, close relationships for sure.
And this was one of the companies that was on the ground floor of the gig economy. Were you starting to feel like there was something new going on there? Because it seems, this gig economy is shifting how the entire, certainly in the Bay Area, you see this up close and personal. Yeah. And slowly it's propagating to the rest of the world. But what do you think of the gig economy, and how was your opinion of the gig economy being shaped when you were at Homejoy?
Oh, good question. I think it can't be stopped. It's growing and growing. It's different when I think of the gig economy now, just as a whole, versus how it applied to Homejoy. I think home services in general it's a huge market, gets a lot of attention from entrepreneurs and investors. But it's definitely a tough space. It's been a few years, or, it's been many years since people really started paying attention to it. And I still feel like there's a lot of challenges. And it's because, everyone compares on-demand services with Uber. That's why you always hear it's the Uber for blank. But home cleaning is just really different than, having someone drive you from A to B. Having someone come inside your home, sometimes unattended, giving someone the keys to your sacred place is a very different, it requires a lot of trust, a lot more trust than someone driving you. So I think that it's just the gig economy in that space is particularly complex. And, a lot of the bright people from Homejoy, from the engineering team, actually went on to Google to help tackle home services at Google. And I think, they're making I actually don't know the details, but I know that they've been working hard at it still. And it's just not something as straightforward as I would say like transportation. But generally, gig economy is something it's a force to be reckoned with. I think more and more people will move towards that. There's a lot of speculation just, looking at millennials who change jobs super often. Millennials probably, I think it's like, I don't know the exact stats, but millennials change jobs almost twice as more frequently than in previous generations. Mm-hmm. And I think it kind of ties into that. It's like having short gigs that are easy and flexible and it's appealing. So I'm curious to see what it'll be like in a couple of decades.
Same here. The downfall of Homejoy was largely due to the classification of the workers as 1099 rather than W-2, if I recall. And this did not bring down Uber, or at least hasn't brought down the Uber or Uber-like services yet. Do you know anything about the what creates a classification of a worker as a contract worker or a full-time worker? Why that was an important distinction, so important that it kind of crippled the company?
Yeah, so I'm not like I don't know the details exactly, so you might need to fact check me a little bit, but at least I can talk to some of the problems that I faced and saw while I was at Homejoy. And just so you know, I actually wasn't at home. I actually left Homejoy before they were closing, so I kind of missed some of this firsthand. But certainly, when you're a 1099 contractor, there's just some boundaries there. So, for example, how about this? If you're a W-2, you're an employee, you can be trained. You can go through training programs, and you can be asked to wear a uniform. And that's something that you can't actually do for a 1099 contractor. So when it comes to home, this actually touches into what I was saying before. You're okay getting into an Uber and the driver can be wearing whatever and they can be playing whatever type of music and have, you definitely get some of the personality of the driver. But when it comes to home cleaning, I think there's a stronger desire for consistency in terms of, people who wanting to get their homes cleaned. So I think there was some struggle there in terms of making sure that the cleans were consistent without actually training anyone. But yeah, I think, to be honest, when it comes down to it, the lawsuits are expensive and Uber has a bigger bank. So yeah, but I mean, people know this too. You can Google it. Uber's definitely had some, has had their fair share of those problems as well.
Yeah, certainly have. So how did when you map your history, your experience at Homejoy to your current situation working on key values, how did the experience there impact your, who you've become as an engineer?
Oh, man. Yeah. So when I was at Homejoy, I was not an engineer. I really what it came down to was there would be bug fixes. So there was let's just say there was a bug and it was affecting all of the cleaners. And of course, if there was a problem with the cleaners, they would contact me. So I would get 100 people, emails, texts, or calls in some facility. They're telling me that there was a problem, but I couldn't fix it. So I think the way that I would tie it back is Homejoy is really the place that made me realize that I wanted to learn how to code myself. I didn't want to rely on someone else to fix a problem. And I think there was this turning point. I actually remember I was managing lots of people and my day was just meetings. There were, there'd be a full 3 days where every single half hour was a meeting. And sometimes they were one-on-ones. And I just noticed that a line of code can have just as much impact, if not more, than having 100 one-on-one meetings. And so I think it was really it really planted the seed, or just really showed me how powerful coding can be. And really, it was just I remember just standing behind some of the engineers being like, can someone please fix this, please? It's really easy. I know it's easy for you guys. Can you please do it? And I just felt so powerless. So I think it was just me realizing how, it was just me figuring out that was the next career move I wanted to make.
Cool. And now that's changed for you. You don't have that feeling of powerlessness anymore.
Definitely not. I mean, I'm not going to pretend like I know everything. I certainly do not. But I feel empowered to, I feel confident that I can figure it out based on just knowing where to find the resources or who to ask or what type of question to even ask. It might take me a long time, but I feel confident that I can figure things out now. Whereas before, I remember the first time at Homejoy, actually, someone showed me the inspector tool on like, I don't know, they were, on Chrome. And I was like, I genuinely thought they were a wizard. I think I called them wizard from then on out. Actually, I was just like, what is this thing? You just changed the words on this page. How did you do that? So yeah, there's definitely some small things, like for anyone who's even a little bit interested, there are some really low level, there's some really basic things you can learn that'll really make you feel so much more powerful, really is the right word.
Yeah, agreed. Just to wrap up, if there's a company out there that's interested in getting listed on key values, what should they do?
Reach out. They should just reach out. I have a page on key values. It's keyvalues/submit. It gives you some of the first steps. And really all that is just figuring out what your 8 values are. And then we'll get started in terms of, writing and qualifying each of those value selections. And I'm very hands-on. So if you need help, I'm there. But definitely if any company is interested, please reach out.
Awesome. All right. Well, keyvalues.io. I'm sure people will go check it out. Lynne,
Hope so.
Thanks for coming on Software Engineering Daily. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you so much. It's been fun.
Dice helps you accelerate your tech career. Whether you're actively looking for a job or you need insights to grow in your current role, Dice has the resources that you need. Dice's mobile app is the fastest and easiest way to get ahead. Search thousands of tech jobs, from software engineering to UI to UX to product management. Discover your worth with Dice's salary predictor based on your unique skill set. Uncover new opportunities with Dice's new career pathing tool, which can give you insights about the best types of roles to transition to and the skills that you'll need to get there. Manage your tech career and download the Dice Careers app on Android or iOS today. You can check out dice.com/SEDaily and support Software Engineering Daily. That way you can find out more about Dice and their products and their services by going to dice.com/SEDaily. Thanks to Dice for being a continued sponsor, and let's get back to this episode.
Wow.